Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into one of China's great satirical novels, a masterpiece called The Scholars. It's a sprawling, witty, and let's be honest, pretty ruthless look at an entire intellectual class that had completely lost the plot.
So let's just start with this verse because it pops up again and again in the book. And you've got to understand this isn't just some pretty poetry. No, this is the book's beating heart. It's this constant, almost nagging reminder of just how hollow all the things these characters are chasing really are.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll get into the secret history behind the book. Then we'll look at the exam-obsessed society it's critiquing. After that, we'll meet the gallery of hypocrites that populate the story and the few true scholars who stand out. And finally, we'll wrap up with its incredible legacy. All right, let's jump in. Part 1, A Scholar's Secret History. So to really get this book, you have to picture the world it came from. We're talking mid-18th century China. Now, on the surface, everything is supposed to be running on these very high-minded Confucian ideals. But dig a little deeper, and what the author saw, well, it was a world just rotting from the inside out with hypocrisy. You see, the guy who wrote this, Wu Jingji, he wasn't some outsider throwing stones. He was born right into the elite class he's writing about. He saw it all up close, the obsession with status, the moral bankruptcy, and it just completely turned him off. So this book, it's personal. It's what he lived. And get this, the title itself is a huge clue. In its original language, it translates to something like Unofficial History of the Confucian Forest. Calling it an unofficial history was a bold move. It was basically him saying, I'm going to tell you the real story, the one nobody wants you to hear. And it was so sharp, so critical, that it had to be passed around in secret. This was dangerous stuff. Okay, Section 2, the exam-obsessed society. This is really the heart of the novel's critique. We're talking about the civil service examination system, and you have to understand, this wasn't just some standardized test. It was everything. It was the one and only way to get ahead, to get power, to get respect. It created this insane pressure cooker where being a good person, well, that became a luxury that most people just couldn't afford. And what was everyone chasing? This one phrase that the book drills into your head, official rank and riches. It's repeated over and over, almost like a sarcastic chant. It's the ultimate prize, but the book shows it for what it is, a completely hollow goal that makes people trade away everything that actually matters, like real knowledge or, basic human decency. So how did you win this game? Well, you had to master this incredibly rigid, formulaic writing style called the eight-legged essay. It had nothing to do with creative thinking or solving real problems. So what did you get? A whole class of so-called scholars who could write these things in their sleep but knew absolutely nothing about how the world actually worked. And if you want a perfect example of how absurd this all was, look no further than the story of Fan Jin. This guy, he's a poor, desperate scholar who fails the exam year after year for decades. Then, at 54 years old, he finally passes. And the news is so shocking, he actually goes insane. For real. But here's the kicker. Once he recovers and gets his official post, he immediately figures out how to be just as corrupt as everyone else. It's this tragicomic story that shows the system doesn't just reward corruption, it creates it. All right, Section 3. This is where we meet the cast of characters. And honestly, this book isn't really about one single plot. It's more like walking through a rogues gallery, a whole collection of people who perfectly embody this moral decay. First up, you've got your foppish sophisticate. This guy is all about looking the part, knowing the right things to say, the proper etiquette, but underneath all that polish, absolutely nothing. Then you have the cunning social climber. He's smart, for sure, but he uses all that brain power for one thing and one thing only, shamelessly clawing his way to the top. And maybe the worst of them all, the sanctimonious hypocrite. You know the type. He's always talking a big game about virtue and morality, but behind closed doors, he's as greedy and selfish as they come. So you see the pattern here, right? It all comes down to this massive, glaring gap. On the one hand, you have the official ideals, moral integrity, propriety, sincerity. And on the other, what do you actually get? Bribery, greed, and constant scheming. This chasm between what they say and what they do, that's the whole point. That's where the satire is just razor sharp. Okay, so part 4, the few true scholars. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds incredibly bleak, and it is, but the author doesn't leave us completely without hope.
Sprinkled throughout this world of phonies are a few genuine characters who act as the story's moral compass.
These are the people who just opt out. They see the whole corrupt system for what it is and want no part of it. They're the counterpoint to everyone else, a living reminder of what has been lost.
And a main one you need to know about is a guy named Du Shaoqing. A lot of people think he's basically the author writing himself into the story. This is the guy who gets it. He's sincere, he despises all the bureaucracy, and he could not care less about fame and riches. He represents that true ideal of a scholar, someone who actually cares about integrity more than status.
And that brings us to our final section, the novel's incredible legacy. Because The Scholars wasn't just some forgotten critique. No, this book was a genuine game changer for Chinese literature. So what made it so different? Well, for one, the language itself. Back then, serious literature was written in this very stiff, formal, classical style that only the elites understood. But Wu wrote this book in the language people actually spoke every day. This was a huge deal. It made the story feel real and accessible, and it brilliantly highlighted how fake and pretentious the formal language of the other scholars really was.
And you can really see its influence grow over time. So, it's written around 1750, but it wasn't even printed until after Wu died. But then it starts to catch on. 100 years later, it's inspiring a whole new wave of novels that criticize the government. And by the early 20th century, it's being held up as a masterpiece, a model for what modern literature could be.
So in the end, that's what makes The Scholars so powerful. It's this incredibly sharp, witty, and insightful piece of social criticism. It holds up a mirror to an elite class that had completely lost its way. And it serves as a timeless, biting portrait of what happens when a society's leaders forget what they're supposed to stand for.